This is Sacristo-nory, and today's story is... Ugh, that's not my monster. Mr. and Mrs. Monster were very proud of their 3 eggs. Mr. Monster kept them warm by huffing with his hot, stinky breath, and Mrs. Monster screeched to them. One stormy night, the first egg cracked. Out climbed an ugly little monster with prickly spikes and snarly fangs. "Oh, he's frightful," sighed Mr. and Mrs. Monster happily. So that's what they called him. Then the second egg cracked. Out climbed another ugly little monster with horny spines and bristly warts. "Oh, she's horrid," gasped Mr. and Mrs. Monster happily. So that's what they called her. Then the third egg shook a bit. Frightful and Horrid gave it a poke, and out crept something very soft and pink. "Oh, he's sweet," said the little monsters. "Ha, let's squash him." "Well, he's not what we expected," said Mrs. Monster. "He is a bit of a shock." "Let's throw him in the rubbish bin," said Mr. Monster. And then suddenly there was a crash of thunder. "Mama!" cried the fluffy one, and jumped into Mrs. Monster's arms. She looked down at her bundle of sweetness. "I think we'll keep him. He may look a little different, but inside he's just a monster like us." So they called him Little Shock. Each day, Frightful and Horrid grew hairier and scarier. They learned how to spit and hiss and scratch and snarl. But Little Shock grew more fluffy. He liked to gurgle and roly-poly and twinkle his big blue eyes. He loved his brother and sister though, and he followed them wherever they would go. "If you want to play with us, you've got to be wild and rampageous," said Frightful and Horrid. They showed him how to howl at the moon until it hid behind a cloud. But Little Shock was afraid of the dark. They showed him how to squash and stamp and trample, but Little Shock saw a worried worm and sat down to give it a hug. "Ugh!" sneered Frightful and Horrid. "He's just a sweetie pie." Soon, Frightful and Horrid were bold enough to go monstering in the wood. "You must take your brother and sister with you," insisted Mrs. Monster. Frightful and Horrid snorted grumpily, but they put Little Shock in a trolley, hid him under a blanket, and tugged him along. In the wood, Frightful leapt out at a fox and made its fur turn white. Horrid pounced on a wild pig and made it jump into a tree. They had a wonderful time. Little Shock, however, cuddled his blanket and played peekaboo with a mouse. "Oh, what shall we do now?" said Frightful. "Let's find something big to scare," said Horrid. Something big rustled in the bushes ahead, so they crept upon it. Frightful and Horrid saw a hairy hump. They winked to each other, took a deep breath, and roared. But the hairy hump was only a little bit of a big monster. It snarled and flashed its eyes. "Who dared roar at me?" Frightful and Horrid were too terrified to run away. Their spines shriveled and their claws curled up. Suddenly, the big monster spotted Little Shock. "Oh, candy floss," he said. Little Shock stared up at the monster's face. His big blue eyes grew wider and wider. Then, mwah! He gave the monster a kiss right on the cheek. "Ugh!" the big monster wailed and dropped Little Shock in horror. He was so afraid that his fur turned to frizz and his bristles fell out. "Help!" he cried, "it's adorable!" And he ran away, crying for his mummy. Frightful and Horrid couldn't believe their eyes. "You kissed him! You kissed him!" they laughed. Horrid swung her little brother high in the air and sat him on Frightful's shoulders. Maybe being cute could be useful after all, and she gave him a little pinch. Little Shock just purred happily. Come on then, said Frightful proudly. Let's go home and all kiss Mum and Dad.